Good morning everyone here in Portland, Oregon, and welcome to today's special lecture and webinar, which is going to be streamed all over the world. So good day, good afternoon, and even good evening to our global audience. My name is Patrick Hiller. I'm the director of the War Prevention Initiative by the Jubitz Family Foundation, and I teach conflict resolution here at Portland State University. On behalf of the War Prevention Initiative, on behalf of the Rotarian Action Group for Peace, and on behalf of the Conflict Resolution Program at Portland State University, I would like to welcome you to this special lecture, You Must Listen, Israeli and Palestinian Narratives in Peacebuilding and Peace Obstruction, by Professor Julia Chaitin.
Good morning. My name is Erin Thomas, and as Patrick mentioned, we're here with several organizations. The organization I represent is affiliated with the War Prevention Initiative, and it's called the Rotarian Action Group for Peace. The Jubitz Family Foundation created War Prevention Initiative and Rotarian Action Group for Peace to support people in their peace-building endeavors. Our vision is a world beyond war by 2030, and the particular group I work with is the Rotarians. In 2013, just 2 years ago in July, Rotary reorganized into 6 areas of focus. Since the 80s, they've been focused very exclusively, or not exclusively, they work in service all over, but their big international effort has been in the eradication of polio. And now they have reorganized with polio, the eradication of polio in sight in only 3 endemic countries. They've reorganized into various areas of service work, and one of them is peace. And our goal is to help Rotarians, support Rotarians, and convene Rotarians in sustainable peace efforts. We have a very special welcome to our global audience. As Patrick said, it's morning, afternoon, and evening. People are attending from all over the world. And we also have a special welcome for our partner organizations, the Alliance for Peacebuilding, the Peace and Security Funders Group. We have networks of nonviolent activists and other national and international peace research institutions who we're affiliated with. And we know many of you are joining us today. So thank you so much for your time and for being with us. One of our missions here at the Jubitz Family Foundation and the War Prevention Initiative is convening. We really want to bring together likely and unlikely allies. And that is what we feel like will make the difference in bringing about a world beyond war by 2030. We hope this event will spark ideas for collaboration among the organizations and people attending, and not just today, as we mentioned, over the course of time, that people will come back to this event and use it for a basis for ongoing conversations about conflicts that they're experiencing in conflict regions or in their own personal lives. The Rotarian Action Group for Peace has convened a Middle East dialogue process, and we know many of the stakeholders of that process are joining us today, and we're looking forward to following up with discussions on that shortly. Another group who's with us today is the Portland Peace Team. They provide nonviolent, nonpartisan conflict transformation. In particular, if an event's going on here in Portland, we know our Portland Peace Team is out there teaching people, training people, making sure that the nonviolent, peaceful face of our city is always the one that we see up close and personal. And we really appreciate the efforts of the nonviolent, of the Portland Peace Team. I'm very confident that today here in this room we'll have very respectful dialogue with each other. This is such a unique opportunity to hear from our speaker and her lifelong quest to create respectful dialogue, even in situations where other people have found it intractable, impossible to find those words to speak to each other. And so here in this room, and with the questions you pose online, we're very much looking forward to questions and respectful dialogue with each other, because there's so much learning that can be done from our speaker and from each other in the course of this event. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Well, let me introduce our speaker, Dr. Chaitin. Dr. Chaitin is a scholar, practitioner, activist, with an expertise in social psychology, narrative research, and peace building. As a longtime resident of the Eshkol region in Israel, which is an area located close to the border of the Gaza Strip, and as a faculty member at Sapir College, which is located directly across the Gaza Strip, she has had years of experience of living in a war zone. Dr. Chaitin has published many books. She's a senior lecturer in the School of Social Work at Sapir College, a teaching fellow in the Master's Conflict Management Program at the Eilat campus of Ben Gurion University. She has written op-eds which have been published in Haaretz and the Washington Post. She's very active in grassroots peace work. She's a board member of and program director of the organization Other Voice, which is an organization that calls for a nonviolent end to the conflict in the Gaza-Sderot region. And she's a member of Friendship Across Borders, a joint German, Israeli, and Palestinian peace education NGO, and of Circles in Eshkol, which is a dialogue group comprised of secular and Orthodox Jews. Currently, Dr. Chaitin is visiting ACE, Israeli professor at the University of Texas at Austin, and this is why we are fortunate to have her here in Portland, Oregon today. I also want to point out that I have known Dr. Chaitin for almost 10 years now. As her student, I learned the importance of not only being a scholar, but also being an advocate for peace and justice. I learned invaluable life and research skills. We conducted research together, we published articles and book chapters, and now I'm glad to call her my mentor and my friend.
And before we invite Dr. Chaitin up here on stage, we have one more person to introduce. We have an esteemed group of academic leaders here from Portland State University. Our conflict resolution, our graduate school program in conflict resolution is very strong here at Portland State University, as many of you locally will know, and those in the global audience I hope will take notice of. And one of those professors here at Portland State University, Dr. Harry Anastasiou, is also one of the founders of the Rotarian Action Group for Peace. He's an active Rotarian here in Portland, Oregon, and a professor at the university, and one of our board members who leads our process of creating respectful dialogue among the 1.2 million Rotarians all over the world, who some of which live, you know, as is in the case here, we have Rotary clubs in Palestine and we have Rotary clubs in Israel, and they're not yet able to create that dialogue amongst each other. They're not yet able to serve in the same Rotary district. And so Harry, we've been lucky to have his voice leading the process of creating that space within the Rotary world today. He will provide us today, before we hear from Dr. Chaitin, with some context on the role of narratives in the peace and conflict arena, in particular, how we can tie that into the role of Rotarians and their work worldwide. He is a Cypriot American and a social and political scientist, and a recognized pioneer in peacebuilding initiatives in Cyprus, Greece, Turkey, the Middle East, and the European Union. I see some of his graduate students here with us today too, which is exciting. Thank you for being here. He's a leading faculty member, as I mentioned, of the Portland State University's Conflict Resolution Graduate Program, and a longtime Rotarian, and he's an academic advisor to the Rotary Peace Centers Committee. The Rotary, one of the missions of Rotary in the peace world is to educate people in peace and conflict resolution, and Rotary is proud to educate about 100 graduate students a year in this field, and he's one of the directing members of that program. He is a recognized scholar. You can find his readings on these topics, and we encourage you to do so. And he will be followed by her presentation. I was getting the order mixed up.
Harry will introduce the,
yes.
Set it up, the framing, and then
yes, got it.
We'll also conclude.
sorry for mixing it up. He will be at the beginning and the end. So thank you. And on a final note from us here at the podium, we'd really like to thank Al and Ray Jubitz. They lead the Jubitz Family Foundation. They lead this vision of a world beyond war by 2030, and their leadership has empowered us and given us the opportunity to be professional peace activists. And that's something that the amount of difference that we hope we're able to make over the course of time is really due to Alan Ray and the Jubitz Family Foundation. We'd also like to thank Rob, who's just coming in and sitting down now. He's the chair of the Conflict Resolution Program here at Portland State University, and has kindly agreed to co-host the event, and numerous other activities we do at the Jubitz Family Foundation. And of course, we thank the rest of our team, the core team at the Jubitz Family Foundation, who makes everything happen behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Patrick and Erin, for such a concise introduction, especially after Annie's presentation. I'm not sure if there is anything left for me to say about the Rotarian Action Group for Peace, but I will add a few thoughts. First of all, it's a great pleasure to be here, and it's a great pleasure to see people come forward in support of peace efforts, which are really in the hour of need as we look around our world today and as we observe the various challenges that lie ahead in the joint efforts to build peace. My brief task for today is just to say a few things about the Rotarian Action Group for Peace, and then a few reflections on the significance of narratives. You have already heard that the Rotarian Action Group for Peace is a kind of semi-autonomous organization, an international organization that has a place under the broader umbrella of Rotary International. Its main task is to focus on one of the areas of interest of Rotary International, which is entitled Peace, Conflict Prevention and Resolution. So this is the area that the Rotarian Action Group for Peace supports, empowers, develops, popularizes to both Rotarians as well as non-Rotarians. It really has to do with building a human infrastructure across the world using the Rotary organization, which is quite prolific in its structure and in its orientation, because it cuts across cultures, it cuts across religions, it cuts across borders, it cuts across ethnic groups. And in that respect, it provides an infrastructure on which the efforts for peace can be built and promoted. What we have done with the Rotarian Action Group for Peace was to find, search, and build ways in which we can bring people together within Rotary and engage them in peace activities and peace-worthy initiatives. We have attempted to create both a human and an electronic infrastructure that helps Rotarians come together around peace projects, that helps Rotarians become connected to the work of peace fellows who graduate from the Rotary Peace Centers, but also to bring together Rotarians and affiliate organizations to work jointly on peace-related initiatives. To facilitate this, we also created what we call a Peace Hub, which is a website that you can find on www.rotarianactiongroupforpeace.org, which has various very interesting dimensions, and I encourage those who are interested to get online and to look at this. What you will find there is, first of all, a map, an interactive map with key locations in the field of peace, which cover a great variety of locations, from Rotarians and the activities they are engaged in, to where the Peace Fellows are and what they are doing, to universities that carry peace programs, to the Rotary Peace Centers themselves, and to organizations that work in the various fields of peace. You will also be able to use a filtering system that can make you focus your search and your connectivity. You can use, for example, a filter that identifies your particular area of peace that you're interested in. You may be interested in peace education, or peace and economic development, or peace and security. You can find then the corresponding organizations or the corresponding Rotary projects that work in that area, and the map will show you all the locations all across the world. So this is one very powerful interactive aspect of this website. There is also a visual databases for the constituents, and with lots of content. Some of them have to do with peace resources around these issues and various other useful information. There is also a social media component to it, through which Rotarians can communicate with each other and with various organizations that are also part of the database. We also have peace resources, as I said, and finally we want to add a news feed that will give current updates on peace events. So all these elements come together in what we call the Peace Hub, and again, its intention is to facilitate the promotion of peace, is to make it easy for people to become connected, is to make it available for people who want to engage in peace and are looking for affiliates, are looking for partnerships, are looking for opportunities to become engaged. So now back to our topic of the day. As you have heard, Dr. Julia Chaitin is going to talk about the importance of narratives focused on a specific area in the world and a specific conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I just wanted to share a few thoughts on the significance of narratives. Narratives are really mental pictures that are created in our minds, which really result from our experience. It's the picture and the framework through which we see the world. And this is very normal to human beings. You know, we all create patterns in our minds which become terms of reference from which we then attend the world and we understand things and we classify things and we interpret things. This process does not stop when humans engage in conflict. However, when humans and human groups are engaged in conflict, and that conflict is protracted, the frameworks become shaped in a particular way. They become shaped because as humans experience conflict, the conflict and the priority of conflict in their experience also shapes the narratives. So the narratives are conflict conditioned. And to the degree to which the narratives are conflict conditioned, they become a bad servant to the interest of peace. In fact, they become an obstacle to the interest of peace. I will give you just one example from my own background and the work that I have done in Cyprus. One of the big controversies in Cyprus has to do with the Turkish troops, which, as a result of decades of conflict, intervened in Cyprus, and they have been occupying the northern part of Cyprus to this day, since 1974. That's how long this protracted conflict has been going on. And the big issue, one of the very big issues in the negotiations and in the dialogue on resolving the Cyprus problem is what to do with the Turkish army. When we initiated some of this dialogue in the buffer zone of Cyprus, we discovered that it was so difficult to talk about it because the different sides had different terms to refer to exactly the same phenomenon. The Turkish side used to refer to the presence of the Turkish army as the agent of peace, and the intervention was named the peace operation. For the Greeks, however, on the other side, it was viewed as a flagrant violation, a mass violation of human rights, and as a violent military intervention and occupation of their country. So how do you talk about it? But again, when we look closely, why is it that the two sides view the presence of the Turkish army so differently? It's because they experienced it in different ways. The Greeks experienced it as an onslaught, as a violent movement of an army that displaced them from their homes in 2 weeks. The Turkish Cypriots experienced it as a great relief. They say, now we can sleep at night. But the Greeks, they say, now we cannot sleep and rest ever, because just a few miles down the road, there is this huge army that displaced us. So this is how narratives are formed under conflict conditions. And the big challenge, of course, is how do you then bridge these narratives? Because they become so different, they become so polarized, and they become so alienated from each other that there is no base for dialogue, because they have no common points of reference. The challenge of peace builders is to erode these narratives by introducing new narratives that may have a common framework and common points of reference. And one way to do this, of course, is by talking to each other. And that's why the theme for the day is you must listen. Thank you.
So thank you, everybody. Thank you for coming out, and I'm so pleased to be here. I want to thank Portland State University, and I want to thank the War Prevention Initiative and the Rotary Action Group for Peace and the Jubitz Family Foundation. It's a great honor for me to be here, and I'm always, I don't know if I can use the word happy, but I'm glad when people want to hear about our conflict, what it's like to be there, and to think about ways that each one of us maybe can do something to make a change. Today I'm going to be talking about the question of personal narratives, personal stories of experiences connected to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I'm going to be looking at when do these narratives encourage peace building, but when do they do the opposite, unfortunately, and when do they actually encourage war? So what I'm going to present are different ideas about what are narratives, what is dialogue. I'm going to present a conceptualization that I came up with over the last year, and then I'm going to give you some examples of what it looks like, and we'll end with some questions. I'm hoping that there will be questions from you, but I'm also giving you questions that I'm interested in hearing what you have to say. So I want to start with something that's a little bit dark. It's a song. It's a song by an Israeli singer, songwriter, musician. He's quite well known in Israel. His name is Yizhar Ashdod. And it's a song, it combines his personal story with Israel's story about the occupation, about the effects that the occupation have had on mostly young, well, it's many Israelis, but you'll see in the song clip that it's about Israeli soldiers who serve in the occupation. And so we have here an intertwining of his story and Israel's story, and it begins a little dark, but I hope that by the end of the talk and by the end of the morning, we have some better ideas about what we can do to move out of that darkness into something that gives us not only more hope, but something we can actually do.
ללמוד להרוג זה עניין של תנופה, מתחיל בקטן ואחר כך זה בא. מפטרל כל הלילה בקספה של שכם, היי מה כאן שלנו ומה שלכם. תחילה רק תרגיל, כת הולמת בדלת, ילדים עמומים, משפחה מבוהלת. אחר כך הסגר זו כבר סכנה, המוות עורב מאחורי כל פינה. דורכת הנשק, הזרוע רועדת, אצבע נוקשה, צמודה אל ההדק. הלב מתפרע, פועם מבוהל, הוא יודע, להבא זה יהיה יותר קל. הם לא איש, לא אישה, הם רק חפץ, רק צל. ללמוד להרוג, זה עניין של הרגל. ללמוד לפחד, זה עניין של תנופה. מתחילים בקטן, ואחר כך זה בא. הבשורות מלמעלה יורדות לרחוב, את סיכוי לחיות הלאה, הסוף כה קרוב. נבואות האימה כקרקוע עורבים, תגיפו תריסים, הסתגרו בבתים. אנחנו רק קומץ והם כה רבים, מדינה קטנטנה אכולת אויבים. בליבם רק שנאה, יצרה ואפל, ללמוד לפחד זה עניין של הרגל. ללמוד אכזריות זה עניין של תנופה, זה מתחיל בקטן ואחר כך זה בא. כל ילד הוא קבר, תאב ניצחונות, ידיים לעורף, רגליים סוכות. זה זמן סכנה, זה זמן חבלה, חייל תתחשל, את סגולה לחמלה. הבן דוד כמו חיה כבר גיל לראות דם, משותפת, שישות ושגרה, מטמטום עד הרוע, הדרך קצרה. רק לנו, אדמת ישראל, ללמוד אכזריות, זה עניין של הרגל. ילד, ילד, תעצור, ילד, ילד, בוא תחזור. בוא אליי, מחמא ליבי, בוא אליי, תינוק שלי, קוקודרים הם השמיים, ובחוץ כבר על אתר, חיילי הבדין עדיין מתחת למיטה. בוא הביתה ילד, בוא הביתה. ללמוד לאהוב זה עניין של רכות, בצעד זהיר בענן עדינות. מהסס נתבוסס נתרכך נתעגל, ללמוד לאהוב זה עניין של הרגל. להיות בן אדם זה עניין של תנופה, זה עובד כמו עובר ואחר כך זה בא. להיות לדקה רק עכשיו רק היום בצידו השני של אותו המחסום, אך ליבנו כבר גס והאור כואבר, חרשים ועיוורים בבואת העובר. נתבונן במלאך הנופל, להיות בן אדם זה עניין של הרגל, זה עניין של הרגל.
Okay. Probably woke up some people, that song. The song is called It's a Matter of Habit, and just also it's important for me to say that Yizhar Ashdod is a very famous Israeli singer, and the song came out 2 years ago, and they played it on the radio for maybe 2 days, and then it was banned, and they took it off the radio. So it's a song that you can get on YouTube, but they stopped playing it on Israeli radio. Okay, so now we're going to move into the world of narratives, personal narratives. To begin with, there's a very interesting fact that actually since the 1940s, pretty much since the end of World War II, throughout the world there have been hundreds of thousands of personal narratives of what we'll call massive social trauma, war, genocides, forced relocation, refugees that have been collected throughout the world. They've been collected for political purposes, historical and social science research, education, and peace building and reconciliation. So it really is a worldwide phenomenon, and so we can ask, why are people in the world so interested in hearing people's stories? So we know that it is inherently natural to tell your story. That's what we do. Humans in every culture tell stories. So narratives or stories include an unfolding of events, what happened over time, characters, who was involved, description. Stories always have a moral, at the end of the story. And so why am I telling you this story? Because it's important for me that you understand X, Y, and Z. So we have an explanation of how each person sees what happened, the reasons it happened. And they provide valuable insight into personal lives, values, and beliefs. But we also know that nobody lives in a vacuum. So through personal stories, we can also learn societal and cultural values and beliefs. And so we actually get these two layers, which are very, very important. Personal narratives are influenced by two larger societal and cultural phenomena. One is called collective narratives. Collective narratives are the narration and the representation or the construction of the past adopted by society. So therefore, it's a social product. Where do we find these collective narratives? We find them in history books. We find them in educational programs. We find them in movies. So these are we have the personal stories, but they're also embedded in the wider societal stories. And we also have what are called master narratives. And master narratives are the stories that drive the political agendas of the time. So we can think of them as society's dominant discourse. How is society talking about a certain topic or issue or events? I'm a psychologist, I'm a social psychologist, and for many years we were taught that it's good to tell your story. It's good when you've undergone trauma, when you've undergone something horrendous, that it's good that you can tell your story. But I say, well, is it? So there are pros and cons, as there are to everything in life. So the pros is that when a person tells his or her personal story of great trauma that they suffered, especially at the hands of others, it can bring relief. It can bring a sense of healing that I'm talking and people are listening. And so I'm feeling some sense of relief that I'm able to talk about it. I'm able to voice it. So it does give voice to the silenced traumas. We have a number of traumas that you don't talk about. And so when you can talk about it, it does bring people some relief. It can also restore a sense of justice, because people may feel that if there's people listening, then they'll hear the injustices done to me, and then maybe they'll do something to work against those injustices. So it can have that effect as well. It gives meaning to life, because when people undergo traumatic experiences, they need to fit it into their life somewhere. What meaning does it have? Why is it important to my life? What am I supposed to do from here out? So it can also give people meaning and purpose in life, which is very important, always, but especially after trauma. And it can build a sense of identity and sense of self, because we know that victims of trauma, and again, massive social trauma, often feel that their personhood has been erased or almost erased. So this helps them build, again, a sense of self, a sense of coherence, a sense of identity. However, there are also cons to telling your own story. And one is what we call the monologues of victimhood. Because when you've been a victim of trauma, oftentimes people get caught in how they're a victim. And so they tell their story always about I as the victim. And we can see how somebody who is always talking about I as a victim, how that would not be very healing or bring much relief. It would just get the person more into the feeling that they have been victimized. It can also bring re-traumatization. Because on the one hand, we say, well, if you don't talk, that's not good. But sometimes if you talk too much, you're reliving the event. And so you're constantly back in that attempt at genocide. You're back at that war. You're back at being forced to relocate. And we have what one of the Holocaust scholars, Lawrence Langer, talked of anguished or unheroic memories, where he found that a lot of Holocaust survivors, when they talked, their memories were just so full of anguish and so unheroic. And so when the people talked, they just felt much worse after they had talked. But we can also ask, okay, is the sharing of trauma narratives, is it good or bad for society? Let's not just talk about the person. So the pros, again, show that this way we have firsthand accounts from people who lived it. It's very important. We have primary sources, people who can tell us what it was like to live during that war, during that genocide. It can also make the past relevant for younger people. People who are 20, 30 today, and they listen to their elders talk about what happened to them in the Holocaust or what happened to them during the 1948 war with what ended with the statehood of Israel. So it becomes relevant. You know, what was my grandma doing? What was my grandpa doing? And they can make sense of it. And another idea is moral witnessing. Moral witnessing means that if people listen, then they can also then carry on the torch. And they can say, okay, this happened to my grandfather, this happened to my father, now we're going to make things different. I'm going to be a moral witness for them, and we're going to do something else. But there are, of course, many cons as well. The first one I'll say is called the chosen or the hot trauma. This is a term used by Volkan. Chosen trauma is, what this means is groups in society, ethnicities, nationalities, have in their past events or an event that is so traumatic that is every time when they think about themselves in the world or their people in the world, they think about that trauma. They can't let it go. It's part of I'll even say it's part of their DNA. So for the Jews, it's the Holocaust. Okay, so even Jews who are 20 years old, 15 years old, if you say the word Holocaust, tears will come to their eyes because it's something that, it's like pushing a button. And so it becomes it's a chosen trauma. And that's how you understand yourself and the world around you. And they can become very hot and very acute. For instance, when we're at war with Palestinians, so then people immediately go to, oh, it's like in the Holocaust when they tried to kill us. So for the Palestinians, the chosen trauma is Nakba. It's the 1948 catastrophe when the Palestinians lost their homeland and lost their nationhood, and most of them became refugees. So in the Israeli case, we have the Holocaust and Nakba. We also have what's called memory prisons, in that the society gets locked into these prisons of memories of these tragedies, and then we can ask, well, do people have to be locked into these memories? Is it my responsibility to be locked into this prison? And people they're as if they're always in this prison of these awful memories, and so society itself is locked up. And it can, of course, lead to renewed revenge or violence. Because we were traumatized, and because we were harmed, then this is what we need to do. So that was very briefly about narratives. But now I want to tie narratives into dialogue. Because when we're talking about narratives, what I'm talking about here is, one person talking to maybe an interviewer or maybe to other people about his or her experiences. But many of these narratives also take place in dialogue. So it's important to understand, at least the way that I relate to dialogue. So dialogue is relationship building, and there have to be at least two people. Okay? So that's a given. And dialogue is often, or monologue is often confused with dialogue, where it's pseudo-communication. It looks like two people are in a relationship, but actually they're talking at one another. They're talking near one another. They're not really talking with one another. So what we have is a lot of monologue, often, which is camouflaged or masquerades as dialogue, but it's actually monologue. In order for there to be true dialogue, we have to understand a number of things. To begin with, it's a joint venture. Okay? If I'm in dialogue with somebody, I can be the best dialogist in the world, but if I'm not connecting to the person, I'm still in monologue. So it's a joint venture, which means that if it fails or if it succeeds, it's due to the two of us. At least I'm going to use two people. So dialogue we really have to think of as something as a joint work, a joint endeavor, and whether it is accomplished or whether it fails, it really depends on the two people who are involved. It's very scary because it's dynamic and unpredictable. We may know where it begins. We can never actually know where it ends. It's a long-term process. So it takes some courage, actually, to go into real dialogue. I always like to use Martin Buber, the great philosopher, and he talked about an I-thou relationship. He actually said that dialogue creates community, dialogue creates humanity. And what is an I-thou dialogue? It's a dialogue where when two people are in communication, are in dialogue with one another, it's a meeting, it's a true meeting of the two people, and they are creating. What they create between them is this sense of community. And that's different. That is different than an I-it, what we think is dialogue, where I am speaking to someone, but as that person is an object or a tool, something something's a reason why I'm speaking to him or her. There are very few I-thou moments, actually, in human interaction. Dialogue builds community and can sustain community. It's a very reflective process. And if it is done well and often and with commitment, it can lead to new shared understandings. Okay, so I talked about narrative and I talked about dialogue, and now I want to kind of put these things together to show you a conceptualization that I came up with over the last year of how they work, and then to look at, okay, what kinds of personal narratives can either lead to peace building or encourage some kind of peace building, and what kind of personal narratives may actually encourage war, may do the opposite. So this isn't, I have to say, this is a conceptualization. It's not, I'm not giving you results of research. I'm bringing you, over the years, over 25 years, I've collected and been in many, I have many narratives, been in many dialogue groups. And so patterns that I see have evolved. So if we look at the continuum, it goes from call for vengeance over to embracing the other. So I'll just give you the idea of what each one is. A call for vengeance means that, why am I telling you this story? Because I want revenge. All right? I want to hurt the other, the people that hurt me. And so that's the moral of my story, and that is my understanding. So that's on one end. After that, we have what I'm calling victimhood, where there's a story, a personal narrative, and it's, I was victimized, and this is how I was hurt, and this is how I was harmed, and to this day I remain a victim. If we move over, we have confusion. Confusion is when people move back and forth between, I was a victim, but I want to see things differently. I was harmed, but I want to do some kind of peace work with my enemy. So people move back and forth, and so that's why I've called that confusion. And the last one is actually called embracing the other. It's missing a few words, while remaining in my pain. The person does not give up their pain. They do not say, no, it didn't happen. But they, even though, in spite of the fact that they are feeling so much pain from what they suffered, they do embrace the other. Now, it can move from one to the other. I can say, I'm shortly going to give you some examples. Happily, there isn't a lot of call for vengeance, and you'll understand why when I show you the example. We hear a lot of victimhood, confusion, and we don't hear a lot of embracing the other. You don't have to start at one end and move to the other. You could be in victimhood, move to confusion, move back to victimhood, or maybe you start from confusion and go to embracing the other, but it gives you an idea. Now, under call for vengeance and victimhood, these are two kinds of narratives that tend to obstruct peace building, especially when they're in monologues. What does that mean? If an interviewer is talking to one person and he's talking about a call for vengeance, it doesn't do much to get peace moving forward. Victimhood, though, sometimes can encourage peace building and join confusion and embracing the other. So it can encourage peace building, especially when it's done in dialogue groups, and if you remember the kind of dialogue I'm talking about. But there are conditions. First, there has to be a desire to listen, to learn, and to gain new understandings. And the most basic, the hardest thing to do in narrative work is listening to someone's story. It's to listen. Okay, you don't have to ask any great questions. But to listen and to contain is very difficult. So there needs to be a desire that I'm going to listen, and I want to learn, and I want to hear. There has to be a safe space for communication. That means in the group itself, there has to be facilitation that is very containing, that is very welcoming, that does not shut up people, and people have to be willing to take part in that. It has to be a reflective process, so it isn't just speaking. It's thinking about it, it's talking about it, it's reflecting again. And so that means it needs to be ongoing. It's not a one-time deal. It's not, I'll come to this dialogue group, I'll hear their story, I'll move on. It has to be something where we're meeting and meeting again and meeting again. But there are also some other societal conditions. Under call for vengeance and victimhood, you can see that if it's an ongoing violent conflict, it's very hard to move towards any peace building because the outside doesn't allow it. If there are more dichotomous master narratives, we're right, they're wrong. We're pure, they're evil. And if the chosen trauma is hot, okay, if it's something that is readily reignited. On the other hand, if there is a lull in violence, or if we're in some kind of negotiation stage, it's easier to make those narratives into dialogue. Also, or if there's less dichotomous master narratives, if the master narratives are beginning to disappear, and people are saying, well, maybe it didn't exactly happen that way, maybe they had a point. And the chosen trauma is not acute. Okay, so that's the general idea. And right now it's very theoretical, and now we're going to get down to people's words. Okay? So some personal narratives, and I'm, of course, in this talk, focusing on the Israeli-Palestinian case. The song, I think, was difficult. Many of these are difficult quotes. I just want you to know that they're not easy quotes. So we're going to start with Yona, who's a Holocaust survivor from Hungary that I interviewed in 2003 for a joint Israeli-Palestinian project on refugees. And we were looking at Jewish Israelis who had been refugees from the Holocaust or Northern Africa, and the Palestinians were looking at people who were still refugees, Palestinian refugees. And at the end of each, and we asked for their life stories, and these were we videotaped these. I was at his home. And at the end, I would always ask, are you interested in meeting, are you interested in joining a group of Israelis and Palestinians and talking together? Anyway, so at the end of his talk, he told me about what happened to him. He wasn't sent to Auschwitz, his family was. He was 14, lost his whole family. And this is what he says. I would put all of the Palestinians on transports and send them to the gas chambers just like the Nazis did with us. And I know Palestinians. I have worked with them, and I've had Palestinian friends. But this is what I think. So I have labeled this a call for vengeance. This is why he's telling me a story. Because now it's very interesting. When he talked about, he didn't say we should have put the Nazis in gas chambers like they did us, or we should kill all the young Germans. That's not what he said. He used it for the Palestinians. And he said, no, I have no interest in meeting Palestinians. And I have to say also that when he said that, I didn't hear this. This was very interesting. I somehow did not hear this when I interviewed him. When I went back to the university and I was going through the tapes and I wanted to look and see what, kind of quality control and what had happened, all of a sudden I see this. And I literally jumped out of my seat. And I thought, how did I miss this? And I went back and it was obviously so troubling to me that I wiped it out. But that was Yona's message, and we don't see any relief. We don't see any healing. We don't see any dialogue. The next one comes from a man that I've called Ahmad. Ahmad was, Ahmad was about 26. This is pretty recent. This was from not even a year ago. He's a young man from Gaza, and we participated in a joint Palestinian, Israeli, German dialogue group in Germany. And I knew Ahmad. I had met him from once before, and I asked him if he would like to join this seminar group, and he said he wanted to come. And so this is what Ahmad said. During the war, he's talking about the first Gaza war in 2008, I was a translator for foreign journalists who came to Gaza. I was only 22 and never had such a job before. I met with them in places being bombed, and there were so many. There were air raids all the time and everywhere. My house shook constantly from the bombs, and windows shattered. I also accompanied them to the hospital where the wounded were taken. And then he began crying, and he was silent for about 15 seconds. I saw terrible things, body pieces, people without limbs, so much blood. I had never seen anything like that before. I had to remain professional and interview the wounded and their parents and the doctors because the journalists were counting on me to explain what was going on. I felt sick but had to go on. I had to help them so that they could let the world know what was happening in Gaza. I still see those sights, can't get them out of my head. The Israelis tried to destroy us, and there was nowhere to run or hide. I was only 22, and I wasn't prepared for such sights. When Ahmad told this story in the group, the meeting, we met for about 4 days, and he didn't talk the whole time. He didn't speak. I mean, he spoke after the sessions, but he never spoke in the sessions. And then the facilitator came up to him and said, we really want to hear your voice. We really want to hear what your life is like. And so when he told the story, he told it, but he didn't look at anybody, except for when he looked at me, because I live on the other side of the Gaza Strip. So he every now and then would look at me, but usually he was with his head down and crying. And that's how he told his story. The story is complete victimhood. There are no good Israelis. There's no compassion here. It's very visceral. And he's also saying, I was 22. I was just a kid. What did I know? And I had to do it because it was my responsibility to let the world know what was going on. Now it is interesting that Ahmad, there was a second part of the seminar a few months later, and he came. And I asked him after that part, would you come again? And he said, yes, I would come again. His story didn't change. It's victimhood. But he keeps on coming. So that's why I say, okay, here's the hope. He keeps coming. And he stays in the room, and he listens to our stories as well. The next comes from a man that I've called Imad. These are all pseudonyms. They're not their real names. And Imad he's in his 40s, and he's from East Jerusalem. And I don't have the time to go into all the, it's very complex. The Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem, what is their identity, nationality, it's very, very complex. But it's important to know in general that Palestinians who live in East Jerusalem, because Jerusalem now is, of course, since the ’67 war, under Israeli control and part of the capital of Israel, is that if a Palestinian leaves her home from Jerusalem and is gone for a few years, they lose their residency. They can't come back. So it's a big issue of people being afraid to leave because then they can't come back, and maybe families have lived there for hundreds of years. So this Imad is what I called confusion. And this was also in a joint Palestinian German-Israeli group, and he was telling his story. I saw them shoot my neighbor. He didn't do anything. He wasn't a terrorist. He was a businessman. The Israeli soldiers yelled at him to stop walking, and he reached for something in his pocket. He was trying to get his handkerchief to wave. They thought it might be a gun. He died in the street, and they wouldn't let us go get him or send for an ambulance. They killed him because they were scared and saw every one of us as the enemy. They also killed one of my students, an honor student, planning to go to college. Imad is a high school teacher. They shot him because he was throwing stones. I know that they shouldn't throw stones, and I've told them it's wrong, but what can you do? They see the army day and night, and they see the settlers moving into the neighborhood and claiming it for themselves. And they're just kids. They shot him in the head. Why didn't they aim for his leg? They just want to kill. And then he continued later on. But I know that there are other Israelis like you here. I feel that Yitzhak is my brother. He's sitting next to a man called Yitzhak, and he puts his hand on Yitzhak's shoulder, an Israeli. I know that he loves me and would do anything to protect me if he saw that I was in danger, and Yitzhak was crying. I know that there are good Israelis who hate the occupation and stand with us, but there aren't enough. I want to believe that there are more, but it's hard when every day all you see is army and settlers. Damn the occupation. And he threw down his notebook and he stormed out of the room. And then 10 minutes later, he came back to the room. And he apologized for storming out of the room, and he said, because he was on the verge of tears and he didn't want to cry in front of us, so he went to the bathroom, he relaxed, he washed his face, calmed down, and he came back. So why is this confusion? Because you can see the confusion. It's back and forth. They shot my neighbor. He's just a businessman. They shot an honor student. They just want to kill. We're just the enemy. But then he says, but then I know that there are other Israelis. And I know, like you in the room. And he puts his hand on his neighbor, and they're both crying. So it's back and forth. And I can say that Imad also, his behavior was back and forth because he was in the organization. And then he would quit the organization. And then 6 months later, he would come back to the organization. So it was like it wasn't only his words, it was his actions. I'm in, I'm out. And then he left the organization again. But then on our email list, he kept writing us emails. So he's caught. He's caught in this web. So the last The last example I want to bring you is from a woman that I've called Hadar. And Hadar was in her 30s, about 32. And she lives in the region that I live in. She lived in Sderot, which is the town right across from the Gaza Strip. It's less than 2 kilometers across from the Gaza Strip. And Hadar participated in a seminar, a weekend seminar that I organized for also with a group that I work with called Other Voice. And we brought Gazans from the Gaza Strip and Israelis. They were young adults, college students or afterwards. And we met over a weekend. We did this 3 times. And each one was telling their story. And Hadar told her story of when it came her turn. The day that broke me was in 2008, when there were days on end with 50, 60, and 70 rockets fired from Gaza onto Sderot. The Tseva Adom means red alert. That's the siren we get when rockets are coming over. Went off time after time after time. I was at home because I was terrified to leave the house and go to work. I made my boyfriend stay home as well. I didn't want to be caught outside when the rockets fell. Our apartment had no safe room. I crawled into the kitchen and lay down on the floor in a fetal position next to the refrigerator, like a baby in his mother's womb. I was shaking and crying, afraid to stand up. I said to my boyfriend, I can't take this anymore. And then when she finished, a Palestinian in the seminar from Gaza asked her, so why did you come to the seminar? And she said, because I believe in peace and believe that so do most Gazans. Extremists on both sides terrorize us, not the ordinary people. Even as I was lying on that floor and sobbing, I knew that there were people on your side doing the same. I can't live like this, and I know that you can't either. We're all humans and deserve the same rights. You should be able to live without fear and walls and restrictions, and I should be able to live in peace in my hometown. I want to go back to Sderot, and I want you to be free. So this I've called embracing the other, but enmeshed in her pain. She doesn't give up on her pain. She doesn't try to say it doesn't matter or I don't remember. She gives a blow-by-blow description of the day that broke her. You know, crawling into the kitchen, lying down by the refrigerator, terrified to get up, and that she has to eventually leave her hometown. She became a refugee. She had to leave her town and move, so she moved somewhere in the general area, but that was outside of rocket range. But why is she here? Because we don't deserve this. I don't deserve this. You don't deserve this. And as I'm lying on that floor, I'm thinking of you as well. So I'm praying for both of us. So I found this to be a good example of how you can remain in your pain, but you do embrace the other. And then that, of course, is something that makes peace building a possibility. They did eventually move back to Sderot a few years ago. So to conclude, I have a few questions, actually, that I'm putting out to you. And the question is, to ask or not to ask for personal narratives. Because if we take, for instance, Yona's narrative of a call for vengeance, I don't know, maybe we're not going to go elicit that kind of narrative. Maybe it's better that we don't hear that kind. So I have some questions. There could be more. But one, for instance, is what are the main purposes for eliciting the narratives? Why are we doing it? Is this something that we can't get somewhere else? What do we want to use it for? Do we want to use it for propaganda? Do we want to use it for peace building? Do we want to use it to educate? So I think we need to decide, because even though there are hundreds of thousands of personal narratives, I have to tell you that most of them have never seen the light of day. They're handwritten. They're on videotapes, if you remember those. They're on discs, CDs. They're on library shelves. They're locked up into cabinets. But we collect these stories, but we rarely do things with them. Will they be shared? And if so, with whom, when, and how? Okay, how are we going to use them? And how are we going to let the people know that we're planning on using them? Another question is, what can we do to change narratives of vengeance and victimhood into types that could encourage peace work? Okay, and even if I take the one of vengeance, how do we get the person into the room? How do we get Yona to come into the room? We don't want to change his story, but how do we get him to say, okay, I will come and I will be there? I don't yet know how, so I'm really happy to hear if people have ideas how to do that. And a final question I pose is, where do narratives from one side connect to narratives from the enemy? Because there's always connection. What are the places or stories that share common ground, and how can we encourage to look for them and understand them? Because as everything in life, if we look for where we share something, if we look for, yes, we can agree on that. We don't agree on 98%, but on that 2%, we can agree. So let's look for those places, because if we build on those places, then we can start expanding. So thank you.
So we have ample time now for question and answer, and Charles from the War Prevention Initiative will be handing you the microphone, and I just ask you to please be considerate of others and keep your questions or comments to a doable time. And then we'll also entertain some questions that probably came in online, and we have Joy back there who will be directing those to Julia.
Julia, I couldn't help but draw parallels to the song with the Holocaust. It sounded so similar. What's your comment on that?
There are, the song, and what I'm talking about here, I've been concentrating on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but I think it's much more universal than that. And, things become habit. It becomes habit to hate. It becomes habit to fear. It becomes habit to kill. And at the beginning, it's harder. But with time, it becomes easier, and it becomes part of who we are. And so for sure, I think in many conflicts around the world, or not conflicts, but genocides, because I don't consider, genocide is not a conflict. It's a whole different animal. But we see these universal points. I'll just say that the Holocaust, because I said it was a chosen trauma, it is a chosen trauma for the Jews and for, of course, Jewish Israelis. It's always there. It's always there. There's not a day in Israel, you pick up a newspaper or you turn on the radio or you watch a news broadcast where the Holocaust isn't mentioned. 365 days, I promise you, without trying, you will hear something about the Holocaust. And you'll often hear something about the Holocaust, and then you'll hear something about the conflict. And so we associate, we put those together.
I'd like to ask, when you make a distinction between dialogue and monologue, and you use Martin Buber in that reference, I like to think of this as a difference in quality of listening, so that in a monologue you have maybe one-way listening, or maybe not any listening at all, really. Dialogue, you have more listening, and then as you move more towards the I-thou relationship, you have an encounter that is transformative. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no, because I definitely agree with that. A dialogue is transformative, and you move. But I don't know if, in monologue I would say there's very little listening, if there's any listening. But a lot of times we have a good friend and colleague of mine, Shoshana Steinberg, and her dissertation and other things that she's worked on quality of discussion between Israelis, between Jews and Palestinians within Israel. And she came up with 7 different categories. And the first category, first she called monologue, but then she changed it. Actually, it's like a ping pong. I say this, you say that. I say this, you say. It's as if we're listening to one another, but we're not. We're talking it's like parallel lines never meet. Okay? So maybe I am listening, but I'm not really listening. I'm listening to something very superficial, and I'm already formulating in my head my superficial answer. And she found in her work, she called them dialogical moments, of which there were over 2 years, 2 minutes of dialogical moments. So it's very rare. But people did also move from the ping pong to other kinds of dialogue. But yes, I would say that in narratives, really the challenge is to listen. The challenge is really to listen. But I think, as you could see from the examples I brought, it's really hard to listen sometimes. you know, sometimes I walk out of these meetings and I really feel like I've been a punching bag. And I sit there and I listen and I contain it because I believe I must. I believe it's really my responsibility and to know what's going on. But it's, you know, not everybody can do it. So, so I would say that really getting into a dialogue is something that you really have to overcome many things, and you have to first be willing to just try to listen.
So for your classification of narratives, these people, when you're speaking to them, where do they sort of fall into line? Are most people on the call for vengeance side, or most people on the embracing side? And is there a difference between Israelis and Palestinians when you see this?
Okay, good question. I say thankfully, there aren't a lot of call for vengeance, thankfully. But one reason could be that these people don't come into the room. So they're not going to participate. I can't get them to come into, I've tried. A few years ago, I interviewed a woman who was a Holocaust survivor, and she told me her son would also like to be interviewed for this same project that I did with Yona. And she said, "Are you interested?" And I said, "Sure, we want intergenerational aspect." And I called him, and I started telling him this is a joint Israeli-Palestinian project, at which point he started screaming at me on the phone. "You're working with the Palestinians, you're a traitor. How can you listen to them? It's propaganda. They're going to use it for propaganda." And I said, I will listen to whatever you have to say. I'm not going to censor you. Your voice is as legitimate as anybody. He slammed the phone down. No way. He slammed the phone down. So there's not a lot of call for vengeance. There's a lot of victimhood on both sides. Very heavy victimhood. I would say embracing the other is very rare also in both. Okay, I would say it's very similar in general, as I'm trying to tell you. And confusion is when people are usually in the process. When they've undergone some process and they're beginning to say, okay, my life has been awful and you're doing awful things to me, your people, but I see you now, and I see him and I see her. So I would say, from what I found, it's kind of equal numbers, but it's hard to know because for the call for vengeance, there could be many voices out there that we can't get to.
We have an online question from Rotarian Don Higgins in Florida. His question, Julia, is the Rotary Action Group for Peace is trying to organize face-to-face dialogue among Rotarians in the Middle East. Are there any recommendations for how to make a progress after so many failures?
Yes, definitely get in touch with me. Be glad to talk. Yes, we have really tried and true ways of bringing people face to face and talking. And in these dialogue groups, what we use the basis is asking people to tell their personal stories in the context of the conflict. And we do it, but we have it set up that it's over time. We have it set up that people have enough time to talk. We make it clear that this is going to be a reflective process. We have it clear that people's questions are not going to be, it's very open and honest. I don't want you to think that it's nice. It's not a nice process, but that people will be able to say what they want to say, but that there is going to be joint reflection and challenging in a very respectful way. So I would say that any dialogue, and especially in our context, it's very important not to be too big of a group also, and to give it time, and I would say you have to try to recruit people who are, at least, as I said, they're willing to come into the room, but not to be too frustrated when people leave, because people will leave also. People will leave. But this facilitation using personal narratives and reflection over time I can tell you it works. It absolutely works. It breaks down barriers, because I could stand up here and give you a lecture about the Israeli and Gazan conflict. I've lived in that area over 40 years, I can tell you. And then there was going to be a lot of argument. It didn't really happen that way. You began, no, we began, whatever. There weren't that many rockets, there were that many rockets. But if I tell you my personal story, if I tell you what it's like for me during the War of the Summer, you can't argue with that. You may not like me, but you can't argue when I tell you that I had to lie on the ground, on the road, and cover my head because rockets were falling, and I was in a car at the time. You can't say, no, that didn't happen. I mean, you can, but, you know. So it breaks down barriers, and it makes it possible then to start having some kind of conversation.
I'm not sure if my question will be clear, but earlier when you were talking about the pros and cons of actually sharing narratives, I had a conversation last night with somebody about that very thing, and as you talked about the spectrum, I think that the narrative would be coming from victimhood, and I was having this conversation saying, you know, I have a question inside myself whether actually sharing, even getting you to share this story will be helpful. And all those questions you asked, I'm just wondering, how do you determine in all the projects that you're doing, you know, there is the just sharing wherever it is on the spectrum, but there's this other piece in me of the not good, the negative piece or the not constructive part. So how do you process that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very difficult, because how do you listen to somebody but then try to get them to move on, okay? So, and how do they not experience that as you're trying to shut me up, okay? I would say that we also have a concept that's called beyond victimhood. So, look, if you're never allowed to tell your story, if every time you try to talk about what happened to you, you're silenced, okay, I don't think that's good. But at some point, if the person, you know, when we know that there are people who tell, it's a script. You know, they'll tell it 1 time, 2 times, 10 times, 20 times, and it's basically word for word. So at some point we can say, in a gentle way, in a supportive way, all right, let's try to understand, let's try to get some more now meaning. What can we do with this? What can we learn from your experiences? How can we use your awful experiences to make a change? And usually, if it's in a supportive context, then people can start moving beyond victimhood, okay? There is also a concept that's very important called social forgetting. Social forgetting. For instance, truth and reconciliation commissions throughout the world. So there have been places where it was a societal decision that after we get out a lot of our stories, now we're not going to talk about it anymore because it is not healing for society. So there have been societies that have decided that we actually do have to consciously decide not to talk about it in public. In the end, is it good or bad? It's hard for me to tell you, but there is something that, yes, sometimes it is helpful if we're not always down there in the mire bringing up the awful things that happened. So we have to find the balance between not shutting up people, but not always being there. Because I say I think the major problem of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not 67. It's not the occupation, it's 48. We're still stuck in 1948. And we have to move, and we are now 2014. And we must do something to take everything that we know and have lived through and move somewhere else.
Thank you for your talk. This is really enlightening. Early in your talk, you were talking about moral witnessing, and a concern came into my mind about that when we're telling someone else's story. So I wonder about the accuracy of that, because you know the telephone game, how the more you tell a story and the farther it gets removed from the original person, the more it gets elaborated. Mm-hmm. And also, do people start to self-define around someone else's story, and then it becomes a script like you were just talking about? So what's the advantage in that moral witnessing?
Yeah, I think it's like anything, you know, we psychologists like to say that everything is balanced, you know, it depends, you know, so it's very important to witness. It's very important to, because again, people who suffered terribly, and the moral witnessing is Marguerite or Dory Lau who talks about listening to witnessing testimonies, is that people really feel that they're no longer part of the human race. They're people who are victims. They believe that they no longer belong to the human race. And so when someone listens and says, wow, you know, and they can see that they're really been touched and moved, and I am going to carry on this message, it can be, it helps that person regain his or her place in the human race from their point of view. But again, the question is, where do you not get caught up in, my grandmother went through this, and now I'm going to tell her story, and you're right, and usually, and I've interviewed a lot of grandchildren of Holocaust survivors, and they tell me a story that I know factually is way off. I mean, it has really, they have their facts completely messed up, but it's very interesting to me what they think they remember and why they remember it and how they talk about it. So part of it is learning to, it's important to know facts, it's important to have knowledge, and it's important also to think about, okay, what does it mean to be a moral witness? If a moral witness for me listening to a grandmother's Holocaust story is now I'm going to go out and kill anybody who's not Jewish because that's the lesson, okay? Or is the moral witnessing, we can never do to minorities what was done to us. That's moral witness, okay? Can I now take this story and what do I take from it? That I should never do that to somebody else, okay? So it's also finding what that means.
Julia, I have a few online questions. One from J.P. Lindstruth in Florida. He's an affiliate professor with the Department of Anthropology at Florida Atlantic University. The question is, how does Israel begin dialogue with Hamas? The second part of that is, what are the chances for a more lasting peace like what was formulated in the Oslo Accords?
Okay, hello to John, a good friend and colleague. How does Israel dialogue with Hamas? I think, you know, what's the famous quote? I mean, who do you make peace with? Your enemies. You don't need to make peace with your friends. They're your friends. And I think a good, and you know what, there is dialogue. There is dialogue between, there's dialogue between Israelis and Hamas. It's just, it's behind the scenes. It's in the shadows. We've had 3 wars in the last less than 6 years. We've had all kinds of military actions. We've had many rocket attacks. And we've had many ceasefires. And how do you think those ceasefires happened? So, okay, so Egypt brokered it, or the US brokered it, but the Israelis and the Hamas were having some discussions and coming to agreement. So, another example is Gilad Shalit, the Israeli soldier who was kidnapped, who was held as a prisoner of war for 5 years and was released a few years ago. It was an Israeli Jew who met with a Hamas member over months in Europe and secured his release. So it happens. So we just have to acknowledge that the other person on the other side is, we have to start getting away from only looking at them as enemy. And it's not that, and again, it's not that I have no love lost for the Hamas, but they live there, they're there. And right now they are in charge. So if my life is a lot dependent on them. And if we're never in any kinds of talk or negotiations, it's only going to get worse for us and for them. And the part about the Oslo, that's a difficult question. November 4th, last week, marked 19 years that our Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, was assassinated by a Jewish Israeli. And it was a very sad week for me because I remember that week very well. I remember that very well. And I can't believe that it's already 19 years, next year's 20 years. And we are so far from any kind of peace negotiation. We are so far. Because in the mid-90s, the Palestinians, I don't want to say they were our friends, but wow, it was different. It was really different. I remember that the Oslo Accords were signed on the White House lawn on September 13th, 1993. Everybody remembers that or has seen that famous picture with Clinton and Rabin and Arafat. And that month, I remember looking at a newspaper. I used to read them. I used to actually hold a newspaper, not like now, just online. And in the newspaper, it was about the Oslo Accords in the picture. And it was Madonna's going to come and perform in Israel. And Michael Jackson's going to come and perform in Israel. And I said, wait a minute, what country am I in now? You know, I mean, it was like, it was a whole different world. And today it doesn't exist at all. So what we need to do, what I think we need to bolster the moderate voices. This is what we need to do, because the extremists used to be the extremists, and now they've become mainstream, or they become the focus of our attention. We need to move them back to the extremities and work with moderates, and there are many, many moderates that would negotiate and that would talk. If you ask people on the ground, they want it, they're ready. How do we get the leaders to do that? That's the million-dollar question.
Dr. Chaitin, I want to note, first of all, that you participate in sort of what I regard as the highest level of all of this, which is to take, you participate in all levels, as far as I can tell, on the dialogue front, which is very important, taking the individual histories and doing research on that, and then working with groups, and then also producing essays and op-eds that basically speak. I don't know what you do in Israel, but I know that here in the United States, you are speaking to the American people. You do that through Peace Voice, through the Washington Post, and other outlets, and that to me is, all three levels are very important. My question to you as an expert in this is, what do you do about the phenomenon that power down groups will engage in dialogue to the point where they feel discouraged because no change has occurred? We see this in Northern Ireland and many other places where all of a sudden it's just like we're not going to talk anymore because we want to see some food on our plate. What is your experience, and what is your solution to something like that?
That's a very common experience, and I have a number of, I'm in touch and friends with a number of Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza, and even during the wars. During the wars, we're in contact with one another. And there are times when Palestinians will, say, don't call me anymore. You know, don't email anymore. I just don't invite me anymore, because what's going on in the room is like a bubble, and it has nothing to do. As soon as I leave, I'm going to be, someone's going to try to shoot me again. A settler's going to try to take over my house. And I've known a number of people who have, who've gone out and slammed the door. I want to say that a number of years later, a lot of them come back. I got very close to a Palestinian woman from Ramallah who was in prison, had been in prison for 5 years, had been tortured. And we met at a seminar, and we spent 7 days, I want to say 24 hours together. We did not sleep. She couldn't sleep because she couldn't go to sleep because of the nightmares she would had. And we were very close, and we were emailing and talking, and then the second intifada began, and she wrote me an email, and she said, take me off your list. I want nothing to do with you anymore. And I wrote her an email and said, I'm really sorry, but of course I will respect what you ask. And then 2 years ago, all of a sudden I get an email from her. Hi, how are you? Hope you're well. What's going on? Do you want to be friends on Facebook? And I said, of course, yes. So it happens. Now, my reaction could be, and our reaction could be, okay, we're lifting up our arms, there's nothing to do. But I think one thing that life where I live has taught me that, I mean, it sounds cliche-ish, but when it gets hard, you really got to work harder, that's all. And when someone goes out the door, then you have to see, well, maybe somebody else will peek through the window. And maybe somebody won't talk to me for 6 months. But then if they call me, then I'll immediately be in touch with them as if 6 months had not gone by. You have to stick to it. You have to stick to it, because I don't know any other way other than sticking to it and showing people that I'm not going anywhere. I may not agree with everything you say, but we're here. And we got to do it together.
In that regard, you mentioned earlier about feeling like a punching bag after some of these sessions. So I'm wondering for yourself as well as for the kin, people involved, about self-care, how you take care of yourself and how you take care of one another.
Yeah, that's a very important question. In Other Voice, which I belong to, it's a lot of times we meet just as a support group, and especially during very hard times, we meet just to talk about what we've been going through. So we support one another, and that's why the group is very important to us. Even when there are times when we really can't do anything, we try, but we don't concretely, maybe we're not doing anything, but we just need one another not to feel alone. Other Voice has, maybe it's not a surprise, educators, psychologists, social workers. So we are good at supporting one another. But I can tell you, but it is hard. And sometimes also what I do is also a few years ago, I don't play it anymore. I used to play Farmville, and one of the reasons I played Farmville was because I had Palestinians who would ask to be my neighbor on Farmville. So I had a lot of Palestinian neighbors. We were building our farms. And one time I'm on Farmville, and a chat pops up in Facebook from somebody in Gaza, and he starts asking for my help, and I'm answering him something. And then a friend of mine from Ramallah pops up on Facebook, and he starts asking me for help. So I have two chats where I'm trying to think of how can I help this friend and that friend. And then a third person comes on from Gaza and asks me for something. I'm ashamed. I got up from my computer, I walked out to my garden and started pulling weeds. I couldn't take it. I just felt, I'm only one person. How can I help this one and this one and this one? And I knew that they were asking me, and it was hard for them to ask me, but I knew that they desperately needed help. And I said, okay, I have the luxury of getting up from my computer, and I have a garden, and I can walk out to my garden, and I can pull weeds. And kind of hoping that maybe some of them would okay, she's not answering, or she's offline, she went offline. And then after about 15 minutes, I said, okay, go back, and I went back and, gave some answers. So timeouts, but my timeouts have gotten, my friends in Other Voice laugh at me. They said, you said you were taking a timeout at 8 o'clock when you left the meeting, and then I saw at 10 you had already posted. I said, well, I had 2 hours timeout, so they get smaller.
How did you know the weeds from the good stuff? No, I'm just kidding.
Not sure I knew.
I'm confused and frustrated, obviously, probably like everybody else is in this room. What can the ordinary American do about the situation, if anything?
I am a firm believer that every one of us can do something. I am a firm believer that there's nothing too small that every one of us can do. Wherever you live and wherever you're from. And I also believe that it's our responsibility, that it's everyone's responsibility. Because if I'm not doing something to at least try to make it better, and maybe I'm making it worse, I don't mean to, but if I'm not trying to do something, then it's hard for me to get up and look at myself in the mirror and say, okay, So I take that very personally as well. And I really don't think there's anything too small. What I do think is that Americans who are not in the region and there and living it day to day, I really would like to see support for positive things. It's very hard for me as a person who believes in peace to see all the anti-work, anti-this, anti-that. We have enough hate in our region. We do not need to import hate from outside the region. So when there's a dialogue group, I would like to see people supporting the dialogue group. When an organization does something, a joint good action, I would like to see support of that. I would like to see support of positive actions, because also what I know from learning and education is people learn better through positive things as opposed to negative things. So I think any positive letters of support, aid to people who are doing the hard work on the ground, I think it's immense, as opposed to letters or actions that, in my opinion, are very hate-filled and making it worse. Because maybe we're moving a little forward and then things from the outside happen and you push us back. And it's hard enough for us as it is. Here.
I have several online questions, so I'm going to pose a few here. I have one from Rotarian Dennis Wong. He's in Connecticut. He's the co-founder of the Rotarian Action Group for Peace. His question is, how can a Rotary help and be involved in the peace process? There are many Rotary clubs in Israel and a very few in Palestine.
Again, I would say that helping dialogue, I don't know that much about Rotary, but I know that there are different clubs and the different groups, and it would be very helpful if that would be, as I said, look for something common, okay? So people who are in Rotary, who are in the same, who belong to the same organization and have the same basic values, so that's something to work on. Okay, I always go back to the idea of, so let's maybe dialogue then about, how we see service. What does that mean? How do we see helping our people? What does that mean? Again, that focuses on doing as opposed to against. And then hopefully finding out, well, maybe, if you ask people if they're willing to sit down with one another, many people will tell you no, but there will be people that'll say yes. So even if you have a small group, if you have 2 people, so bring 2 people together, talk. If you have 4 people, 4 is better. That's already double. But not to say it's too small or it's not enough. So I would focus on that.
I have another online question from Deb Reish, who's in Abu Ghosh, Israel, Palestine. The question is there any work being done on creating new stories together?
I wish we were there. I don't think we're there yet because there's such a gulf between the stories. But I think we are creating new stories in our joint peace work. I think soon I'll show you also a very 3-minute video that shows actually evolution of friendship, of a deep friendship between a woman in Israel and a woman in Gaza. And I think by having these relationships, we're creating our story. So it's very small. I think the challenge is how to duplicate that, how to multiply that. Because as I said, these dialogue groups work very well. The idea is but our challenge is how do they make them widespread? How to get to a critical mass? Because by doing that, then we are creating our stories. And we're not only stuck in our story. So it's happening, but on a small level.
Is very similar to the one from your region. It is where are the visionaries for the future? I mean, the stories are all about the past and the pain, and you said there's way too much hate in the region. Who are the visionaries, and what are they doing to create a future for the children, the future generations, a future of peace? Can you tell us what's happening on that front?
I really think the visionaries are on the ground. I know many Israelis and many Palestinians who really have a clear picture of a different kind of life, and they're teaching their children differently, and they're being very critical. They're not afraid to be critical of their society, and they're not afraid to speak up when there's racism and when there's hatred. So I think there's a lot on the ground. People are caught in the past, yes. It's very easy to get to those past stories of what happened during 1948, of what happens during the occupation, of what happened in the Holocaust, of what happened in the rockets. But many people that I know, ordinary people, really ordinary people, have, if we were in power, I kind of have a dream in a way. I've had this dream for a long time, that we just set up chairs on the Israeli side, and we set up chairs on the Gazan side, just people, and we work it out. I'm telling you, we've worked it out by the end of the day. We've absolutely worked it out by the end of the day. So I think there's vision, but the vision isn't getting. We have to figure out how to get that vision to become, a vision also of our leaders, who are willing to be courageous enough to say, okay, we have all of this, but now it's our duty to do something else.
Julie, I have another online question from Dr. Joseph Cohn from Maui. His question is, does the presenter have any co-counseling experience?
Co-counseling, yes, a lot of times we work together. Any joint work we always do jointly. We fashion the seminars together. We come up with the schedule together. We invite the participants together. It's like in any dialogue. I can draft a wonderful seminar, but it's if I'm doing it with Palestinians, I can't do it. It's meaningless if I do it by myself. So there's a lot of people. Maybe that's a big word, but there are people who definitely have great expertise in this, a lot of experience, and they are working together. And so that does also make the space a safe space. It makes it possible to have the dialogues.
Hi, Julia. I've been to the region. I've been to the West Bank. I've been to East and West Jerusalem. I've been to the Jordan Valley, Sea of Galilee, all those geography references. What I remember is the people. And I was there and we were listening, and it was all about listening to their stories and creating the dialogue. I remember a time in Ramallah in a government office, though, that the person turned to us and said, well, what are the concrete actions? And I'm kind of haunted by that to this day. And I want to frame it as a question that you can kind of, I love your vision that you just painted about the two sides sitting across the fence from each other and just people talking. But what really is the result of this work? What are the actions that we can expect? And really, from a grander scheme, what is it that we're up to? What is it that you're up to?
Mm-hmm. A very important question. This peace work has many levels. The conflict will continue 100% if there's not a peace agreement. If the leaders do not, the people who actually have the power to make decisions and implement those decisions, if they do not do it, then it's not going to end. However, if they do it, if they sit down and come, and you know what? We know what the solutions are. We've known what the solutions are for 20 years. There aren't any surprises anymore. But if tomorrow they sign it, okay, and there's nothing on the ground, it will not last. It will not last because people don't know how to be with one another. So we need different levels. And that's a lot of the work that we do, is that we say, we know that we're not, it's a structural conflict. It's not interpersonal. It's not that Ahmed doesn't like me and I don't like Ahmed. It's not that level. But we're saying that after the peace treaty is signed, and we're working also for them to get to that start doing something, we think they're going to need people like us who know how to be with one another. So it's not instead, it's alongside. And the more that we have people like that, then we can multiply that. We can multiply that in business. We have small businessmen in Gaza and small businessmen in Sderot. And if we know how to bring people together and talk, we can get them to do something that's good for the region. We know social workers in Gaza and social workers in our area. And we can bring them together and they can talk about how to make their children's lives better, how to, health, welfare. So I think that things have to be done on that level, on those levels, but we need, it has to be a concerted effort.
Julia, you said that you thought in terms of what people can do here, that it's better to try to do something positive than something negative. I wonder what you think of the boycott, divestment, sanction movement.
Yeah, it's a big issue, the BDS. I can put it this way. I 1,000% understand why Palestinians are boycotting us. I don't have any I mean, that to me is a no-brainer. We've been occupying them, we've been cruel to them, and I can understand why they want to boycott us and why they don't want to be in touch with us. I can think it can be counterproductive a lot of time, but I understand where it comes from. When it comes from outside Palestinians and it comes from other peoples from around the globe, then my feeling is more that it's very detrimental and that it's also counterproductive. And there's more and more moves for academic and cultural boycotts. So, for example, my beginning slide has my affiliation with the Sapir College. Sapir College is a public college in Israel. So if you belong to the boycott, you should be in this room listening to me, because I put up my institutional affiliation. And I think, so okay, if somebody doesn't want to listen to me, of course, that's also okay. But I think the boycott is so across the board. It's shutting down, again, in my opinion, many of the conversations that are happening. Now, I also totally agree that something needs to be done. We need to be shooken up. I agree. But I think that an across-the-board boycott really calls into question the legitimation of the Israeli state. And I also am a firm believer that every people are entitled to self-determination. And I truly believe that for the Palestinians. And I truly believe that for the Israelis. And I truly believe that you can't give one people right and take away another, and it's okay. So I think that if there's boycott, if there's divestment, if there's sanctions, I think that it has to be more fine-tuned and think about who we're boycotting, who we're divesting from, and who we're having sanctions against, because I think that it is harming the many grassroots levels that then it makes it, we're always being squashed down more and more, so it makes it very difficult for us to do something.
Julia, I have a closing question from Dennis Wong, our co-founder of the Rotarian Action Group for Peace. How does one get these stories for peace to the decision makers? Part 2 of that question is, I wonder what stories the decision makers have that are obstacles to peace.
I think we hear the decision maker stories all the time. I think we have a good clue. I write my, we have a Knesset, the parliament in Israel, and I often write emails to Knesset members when they do things that I think they shouldn't be doing. And most of them, of course, don't answer me. And sometimes I get support, and a lot of times I get answers that, I have to delete that quickly, the answer I got. And I try to get, look at, there are different stories. There are people here. I live in this area. I live in an area that comes under rocket attack. I teach in a school that comes under rocket attack. I know what it's like. Try to listen to my story, and not with a lot of success. I think we have to keep trying. We just have to keep at it. There's no easy way. So we have to keep sending them our stories. We have to keep saying, look, we invite them. Come and listen to this event. Maybe eventually one person will come. Maybe eventually 2 people will come. We just have to keep at it.
Thank you, everyone. This has been a fantastic discussion in terms of the depth of the questions you asked and the points you brought up. I do want to recognize real briefly the question by Dr. John Lindstroth, who Julia said was a colleague and friend. He is my other mentor and advisor. And I'm very glad he tuned in, and he's, like Julia, an outstanding scholar and also always in a search for peace and justice. Julia has a little video that she wanted to show to you as her concluding remarks. And after that video, we're going to have Harry, who so nicely introduced the event, wrap up for everyone, and will provide a summary of what we heard here and share his own thoughts on that. So we'll show the video now.
Okay, so I'll just give one sentence about what you're going to see. It's a 3-minute video. It's really quite hot off the presses. It was part of an interview that was done for Channel 2, a big channel station in Israel. And it's been following, this reporter has been following 2 women, Ronnie, who's another voice, who lives right on the Gaza border, inside Israel, right on the Gaza border, and a woman named Maha, who's a Gazan. And they've had friendships for 4 years, and I'm also a very good friend of Ronnie and a very good friend of Maha. And so every now and then he interviews them. Maha comes into Israel, often bringing sick nephews for hospital help, for treatment. Anyway, so some of it's in Hebrew and you won't be able to understand. Some of it's in English, but I think this is quite different than the song that I began with. It's actually how people who are in dialogue and who keep up the dialogue get to a very different place.
How come you two are still hopeful?
We had those moments of despair, but we stand up for each other, and we encourage each other. I say to her, if you lose hope, I will lose hope.
החברות יוצאת הדופן בין רוני מנתיב העשרה שעל הגבול ובין מהה שגרה מעבר לחומה בעזה כבר שורדת 3 מלחמות. הן הכירו כשרוני, שפעילה בארגוני דברות, התנדבה להסיע אותה ואת אחיינה לטיפולים בתל השומר, והן הפכו חברות קרובות. כשפגשנו אותן לראשונה לפני 2 בעקבות עמוד ענן, מהה ביקשה שנטשטש את פרצופה ונעוות את קולה מחשש שהחמאס יתנכל לה.
This one must fall, It's like we should be open together, live like neighbors.
כעת, בביקור הראשון שלה בישראל מאז צוק איתן, היא כבר לא חוששת להיחשף. I feel you were more scared from Hamas 2 years ago.
At the beginning, just feel to express your opinion, because if you're not with them, then you are against them. But these things are changing, and I met more people, and
more people that feel like you, that are...
Many people in Gaza joined many peace organizations and trying to make a difference. And, people step by step.
Hi, Ma, how are you?
במהלך צוק איתן, כמו בזמן עמוד ענן, רוני ומהה הסתמסו ודיברו כל יום מדי כמה שעות, לוודא שכל צד על משפחתו עבר בשלום את מטח ההפגזות האחרון.
רוני, what was the scariest moment in צוק איתן?
When our house was hit by a mortar. And my husband and I were in the shelter, and suddenly we heard the explosion and glass shattering everywhere.
What was the scariest moment for you?
When they started hit the big towers in Gaza. And one of them is in my area. And I said, that's it.
מהה מרגישה אולי שהרחוב בעזה מתעורר לאיתו, אבל הם עדיין חסרי אונים מול השלטון, ומבחינתה, האיש שיחזב אותה יותר מכל, הוא דווקא אבו מאזן.
He left all the people in Gaza without, he doesn't care about the people in Gaza, honestly.
ולמרות הייאוש מהמצב שרק התגבר אחרי צוק איתן, שתי החברות מרגישות שהן חייבות להישאר מלאות תקווה, כי פשוט אין ברירה אחרת.
I realize that as long as the people there don't have any hope, don't have a life that really is worth living, neither will I. And true, I do have a nice home and a nice garden, but if I have to always worry about the next alert, and worry if their next rocket is going to hit or not, that's not what I call a life worth living.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And now I ask Dr. Harry Anastasiou to share his closing remarks.
I think we heard quite a bit today. It was a very, rich exchange in content. We have seen the various perspectives, how they operate, how they interact. But my task for now is to give a summary of what has been said. I will give it a try. The topic today of course, was on personal narratives. And we were told that some personal narratives, which are, of course, connected to the broader narratives of society, can encourage war and perpetuate the conflict, or they can curb conflict and work towards peace. We have started with that very interesting little film entitled It's a Matter of Habit. And I think there we saw the two narratives in a rather artistic rendition of how they work. My understanding of that film was that it's all about learning. We can either learn to kill and learn to fear and learn to dehumanize one another, or we can relearn, like children, all over again. How to love, how to be human, how to be restorative. The personal narratives, we were told, the phenomenon of personal narratives is not new. We had plenty collected from around the world. Julia gave us many, many examples. We were told that they are really human stories and that they all have a moral component and a moral core to them, but that they also reflect and are embedded in the broader narratives of society. And the narratives of society, which are collective, can also play that dual role. They can either impede peace or they can enhance peace, as the case may be. We were also told that there are pros and cons to narratives and the expression and the sharing of narratives. It's not really a straightforward phenomenon. And that some narratives may simply perpetuate and get people and the audience to relive the conflict and to relive the trauma, whereas other narratives may give the opportunity to move beyond the drama and the victimhood. We were told that some narratives may also imprison people and imprison us into historical memories, where the human mind gets stuck in the past. But we were also told that narratives can also help heal and help us, renew our sense of self and our sense of a vision for the future. And then, of course, our speaker went into the issue of narratives and dialogue, trying to differentiate the kind of dialogue that is constructive and peace-worthy and differentiate it from the kind of dialogues that are, in essence, monologues, where you have two sides speaking when, in fact, they're actually speaking to themselves and not speaking or listening to the other side. And then we were given the directives as to what makes a true dialogue. That a true dialogue, it's all about a joint venture. It's about an unpredictable interaction between the two sides. And that it has to have an I-thou component, where the humanization process is really part of the exchange. True dialogue really builds community. And true dialogue is really reflective. And true dialogue is really ongoing. It never really ceases. We are also told that the process of dialogue has a spectrum. And it's a spectrum that starts from the call to vengeance, the expression of victimization, confusion was the other level, and of course there is also the phenomenon of embracing the other in the course of engaging in dialogue. Victimhood and the call for vengeance, of course, are phenomena in narratives that block the process towards peace building. But there is also a pathway or pathways to go beyond both the call for vengeance and victimization. But there are certain prerequisites, we were told. There must be a desire to listen. There must be a safe place where people can feel free to express themselves. The dialogue must be reflective, and it must also be ongoing. These are the prerequisites that lead to constructive dialogue, that leads to peace building. The social context in which dialogue takes place was also another component that was stressed, and that the social context, of course, is where the collective narratives and the master narratives are rooted. So depending on the nature of these narratives, they can either impede the dialogue that happens at the interpersonal and intergroup level, or they can support the dialogue. And we have seen many examples of this. When the nationalist dialogue set in, they tend to block and delegitimize everything that happens on the ground that is positive. But when the master narratives become more opened up, they tend to empower, they tend to support, and they tend to amplify the capacity of people in dialogue to move even from dialogue to action. Then we had the very tangible and concrete examples of personal stories. I will not repeat them, but we had an example from each of the categories. We had an example that reflected the call for vengeance. We had an example that reflected victimhood. We had an example that reflected confusion. And of course, an example that reflected the embracing of the other. We concluded by a reference to the need to differentiate narratives. Not all narratives are the same. And it's not always straightforward whether narratives should be shared or curbed or conditioned. But narratives are important because they are the human story. They are the story that people reside in. They are the story and the stories that link to our identity, to our sense of self, and to our sense of the future. So how to differentiate them is really the challenge. And I think throughout the talk today, we received several directives, and we were pointed to several pathways that can enable us to not only differentiate the narratives from those that promote war and those that promote peace, but to actually transform narratives into more peace-enhancing and peace-inducing narratives. We were also told, in conclusion, that there is a need to create also joint narratives, where the former rivals can create a vision and an interpretation of reality and an interpretation of self that has enough overlap and enough common points of reference to create a new reality, not only within the human mind, but also in the society in which these groups reside. That is really, from my perspective, the highlights of what we heard today. I would like to also conclude as the representative of the Rotarian Action Group for Peace. I would like to conclude by reminding all of us that the Rotarian Action Group for Peace and the event today are the kinds of cooperative and collaborative initiatives that I think can build capacity for peace building. For those of you who don't know much about Rotary, I would like to simply share with you what is often called the Rotarian four-way test. And it's really a four-pronged test that reflects the spirit of Rotary and also directs the culture, the actions, and the behavior of Rotarians. And this is the four-way test. Number one, is it the truth? Number two, is it fair to all concerned? Number three, will it build goodwill and better friendships? And number four, will it be beneficial to all concerned? When I first came across this four-way test of Rotary, I was really struck by how close and intuitive it is to the work that we do in peace-building initiatives and to the vision that peace builders and peace agents and peace organizations have and work with. And I would like to just draw a few connections to the example that we had today, in today's presentation. If we take the first test of Rotary, is it the truth? A lot of what we heard today was about truth, was about the truth as it is reflected in people's experience. And we have seen that there are many truths. But in dialogue, we end up with a sense of truth that is much broader. The second one is it fair to all concerned? This is really the justice dimension. When people come together, there needs to be that sense that justice is maintained, that fairness is maintained. And the third one, will it build goodwill and better friendship? This is all about building relationships. And what we have seen today is indeed all about building relationships, relationships that are peace supportive and peace enhancing. And fourth, will it be beneficial to all concerned? And this is about outcomes. The things that come out of these processes, the ideas, the narratives, the projects, the actions, are these fruits well distributed so everyone can benefit? So these are some of the pathways to peace. Thank you very much, and I hope everyone does his and her part in this extraordinary historical effort we call peace building. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anastasiou. Thank you, Dr. Julia Chaitin. Thank you to everyone in here, and thank you to our global online audience. With this, we conclude and I was just being told I should show Julia Chaitin's book, Peacebuilding in Israel and Palestine, Social Psychology and Grassroots Initiatives. A fantastic book, very informative, and I think a lot of what you read in here, Julia presented today in a very tangible manner. So thank you, everyone, and have a good day.